Have you ever noticed how the most grounded people in your life just vanish? Not with drama, not with noise, just a quiet absence. Unannounced, unexplained, but unmistakable. They stop replying to messages that used to light them up. They leave the room when the conversation turns shallow. They cancel plans without guilt. They drift, not out of weakness, but out of clarity. And you wonder, what happened? Here's the truth we don't say out loud. Intelligent people don't disappear because they're confused. They disappear because they've seen enough, heard enough, explained themselves enough. They've reached a point where their presence is no longer required for the performance. We live in a world addicted to noise, a world where your worth is measured by how quickly you respond, how visible you remain, how available you are to everyone but yourself. It's not just social exhaustion, it's presence distortion, a subtle war on your attention, dressed up as connection. You're expected to show up, reply instantly, attend everything, care about everything, comment on everything, until you forget what your own mind sounds like. And when someone stops playing that game, we call them distant. But what if they're not pulling away? What if they're simply returning to themselves? Disappearing quietly is not a retreat. It's a reconfiguration, a refusal to stay visible for the sake of optics. It's not ghosting. It's a recalibration of value. It's an act of internal relocation, where your energy goes where it's respected, not where it's drained. Because here's what intelligent people know. Silence is not emptiness. It's where clarity breathes. Absence is not avoidance. It's a boundary. And presence is not just physical. It's psychological. It's spiritual. It's what you choose to carry into the moment and what you withhold as a sacred act of self-preservation. They disappear not to punish you, not to provoke you, but to protect something far more fragile: their peace, their focus, their unseen, unmarketed wholeness. And when they go quiet, they're not asking to be chased. They're asking not to be misread, because not every exit needs to be loud. Some exits are wise, still, strategic. So if you've ever looked around and realized you no longer recognize the space you're standing in, the noise, the narratives, the notifications, if you felt the cognitive leak of being too available to people who don't value depth, then maybe disappearing isn't giving up. Maybe it's remembering you still have a choice. In this video, we'll explore 5 deeply human, psychologically strategic reasons why intelligent people disappear quietly. Not as a performance, not as punishment, but as self-respect in motion. Because in a world obsessed with noise, the most revolutionary thing you can do is walk away without saying a word. Not everyone in your life is talking to you because they care. Some are talking because you're a source of validation, attention, access, or control. And intelligent people sense this, not because they're cynical, but because they've trained themselves to read beyond the words, beyond the tone, beyond the surface narrative. They feel the shift when a conversation goes from mutual to transactional. They notice the subtle weight behind a just checking in text. They recognize when interest is conditional, when your presence is only welcomed as long as it performs. It starts small. Someone keeps venting but never listens. Another always wants your insight but disappears when you need theirs. You're expected to be the understanding one, the strong one, the wise one. But over time, something changes. You walk away from conversations feeling emotionally hollow, not because the topics were heavy, but because something was being extracted from you, not exchanged. That's not connection. That's emotional bandwidth theft. And here's the hard part. It's rarely intentional. Most people don't realize they're doing it because they were conditioned to relate through consumption, to seek emotional supply, not emotional depth. But intelligent people start picking up the pattern. They realize that not everyone deserves unfiltered access to their energy. They begin to treat presence like currency, not in a cold transactional way, but in a sacred selective way. Because when you show up fully, when you listen deeply, when you speak with clarity, that's not free. It costs you focus, stability, and sometimes sleep. And if the space doesn't honor what you bring, they disappear. Quietly, no announcement, no confrontation, just absence, like water withdrawing from a cracked cup. The Stoics understood this intuitively. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Never value the opinion of someone who drains your mind." He didn't mean to live in isolation. He meant, don't tether your spirit to those who feed on it without feeding it back. Psychologically, this is about boundaries, but not the kind you declare out loud. The kind you demonstrate through non-response, through non-availability, through not explaining why you're suddenly hard to reach. Because when your energy is being farmed, any explanation becomes more fertilizer. Any guilt becomes compliance. So intelligent people opt out. They leave messages unanswered. They let certain calls go to voicemail. They don't ghost. They disengage strategically, softly, completely. That disengagement isn't cruel. It's clean. Because they've learned, every time you force yourself to participate in spaces that drain you, you reinforce a silent contract that says, I'll keep showing up, even when it costs me. And they're done paying that price. So here's the reframe. If someone feels distant lately, don't rush to take it personally. Ask instead, was I returning what they were giving, or was I just consuming it? Because intelligent people are not emotionally endless. They feel, they notice, and eventually they choose. They choose silence over performance, stillness over extraction, disappearance over depletion. That's not cold, that's calibrated self-respect. Because when they realized their energy was being farmed, they didn't demand better soil. They simply stopped growing there. Some people leave without ever leaving. They're still in the room, still nodding, still smiling politely. But if you look closely, you'll sense it. They're no longer there. Because intelligent people have mastered something subtle and powerful. The ability to relocate internally without making a scene. They don't need to slam doors. They don't need to declare, I'm done. They simply stop pouring their presence into places that dilute them. It's a quiet shift. 1 minute, they're engaging, curious, invested. The next, they're present only in form. The light behind their eyes is focused elsewhere, not out of spite, but out of clarity. They've realized that not all disconnection requires departure. Sometimes you don't need to exit the conversation. You just need to exit the frequency. We live in an age where visibility is confused with value, where presence is expected even when there's nothing left to give. But intelligent people reject that pressure. They know when their clarity is being blurred by noise, when they're asked to be available but not authentic, and instead of arguing, they quietly change frequencies. It's like switching radio stations in the middle of static. No announcement, no apology, just a subtle recalibration. From chaotic to clear, from reactive to rooted. And here's the nuance. This isn't detachment out of coldness. It's protection from presence distortion. The subtle psychological erosion that happens when you stay emotionally tuned in to spaces that don't reflect you. I once met someone who was always on. At work, in friendships, even in silence, she was still performing. One day she said, I'm tired of being in rooms where I have to translate myself to be understood. That sentence stuck because it wasn't about wanting to leave. It was about wanting to stop splitting herself into versions for others to digest. That's internal relocation. It's not physical absence. It's the strategic withdrawal of emotional currency, and it often looks like stillness. But beneath it is a powerful shift in alignment. The Stoics taught us to be deeply rooted in self-governance. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." And modern psychology echoes it. When you stop responding to outer chaos, your nervous system finally has space to recenter. But to do that, you must master the quiet skill of emotional withdrawal. Not avoidance, not suppression, just the calm decision to stop placing your peace in jeopardy for the sake of keeping a conversation alive. Intelligent people stop performing for places that can't hear them. They stop reacting to stimulus that doesn't deserve their energy. They stop begging for coherence in incoherent spaces. And the moment they feel their inner compass start to spin, they relocate, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, without packing a bag, without posting a quote, without letting the room know they've left. Because presence isn't about proximity, it's about where your energy is actually rooted. And when you've mastered internal relocation, you no longer need to escape the noise. You simply rise above its reach. So if you've ever felt like you were in the right place but the wrong vibration, if you've caught yourself nodding while your soul whispered, "This isn't where I want to be," that wasn't confusion. That was clarity knocking. And the most intelligent thing you can do is answer quietly. There comes a moment when peace becomes non-negotiable, not out of pride, not out of bitterness, but because the cost of compromising it, even slightly, becomes too steep to ignore. Intelligent people don't arrive at this moment quickly. They often begin by giving people the benefit of the doubt. They explain themselves. They clarify their tone. They soften their truth just enough to keep things smooth. But over time, they notice something. Every negotiation chips away at their clarity. Every apology for simply needing space. Every compromise made to keep the peace. Every conversation dragged out beyond its purpose. It's not diplomacy, it's erosion. They recognize how often they've confused being understood with being safe, and they begin to see through the emotional fine print. Those unspoken agreements where you're only accepted if you minimize your truth. These aren't relationships, they're silent performances. Rooms where your presence is contingent on how much noise you're willing to tolerate. So they stop, not in anger, but in awareness. They stop arguing with people who pretend not to understand. They stop rephrasing their boundaries in gentler terms just to avoid discomfort. They stop defending their solitude, their values, their tempo. Because here's what they've learned. The more you explain your peace to those addicted to chaos, the more you invite chaos into your home. It's like negotiating the terms of silence in a room full of shouting. Eventually you realize you're not meant to change the room. You're meant to walk out of it. And walk out they do, not loudly, not dramatically, but with calm, unshakable certainty. The kind that comes from reclaiming the energy once spent on futile conversations. The kind that no longer seeks to win or persuade, but to protect. The Stoics understood this with piercing clarity. Epictetus said, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master." But what if it's not anger that enslaves you, but the constant urge to explain, to smooth things over, to be reasonable in unreasonable dynamics? Psychologically, this need to negotiate peace often comes from early programming. Keep the harmony, be likable, don't make waves. But for intelligent people, emotional adulthood means unlearning that reflex. It means realizing that not every relationship deserves a peace treaty. Some just require distance. And that distance isn't punishment. It's boundary without broadcast. It's no longer saying, "Here's what I need from you." It's saying, without words, "I won't stay where this is constantly up for debate." Because when you keep negotiating peace, you make your sanity a group project. You allow others to co-author your clarity, and in doing so, you lose yourself, one concession at a time. So intelligent people withdraw, gently, quietly, not because they can't argue their case, but because they're done living in a courtroom. They don't issue statements. They don't craft exit speeches. They leave behind the need to be agreed with, to be approved, to be anything other than centered. And that choice, it's not arrogance, it's wisdom. Because real peace doesn't beg to be accepted. It doesn't justify its presence. It simply settles like still water in the soul of those who no longer seek external permission to feel whole. So the next time you feel the urge to explain your calm, ask yourself, am I honoring my truth or negotiating my silence? And if it's the latter, walk away, quietly, completely, without remorse. Because when intelligent people stop negotiating their peace, they don't just protect their energy, they reclaim their life. Apologies are supposed to bring closure, but in today's world, they've become something else, a form of emotional anesthesia, a way to soften discomfort without actually changing behavior. And intelligent people, they begin to notice. They notice how "I'm sorry" often arrives faster than accountability. They notice how apologies become rehearsed performances, rituals of re-entry without transformation. They hear the same words from the same people on loop. "I didn't mean it. I was just tired. You're too sensitive." But the impact remains and the pattern continues. Eventually, something inside them shifts, not out of anger, but from deep, exhausted clarity. This isn't remorse, it's reputation management. It's not healing, it's a sedative. And they stop buying into it. They no longer mistake volume for sincerity. They no longer equate tears with transformation. They've seen how apologies can be weaponized, used to reset the emotional playing field, to bypass consequences, to silence confrontation with soft language. But Stoicism teaches that words without virtue are noise. Epictetus warned, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." And modern intelligence echoes this. Change is not what you say, it's what you stop doing. So when intelligent people start to feel trapped in an apology loop, they stop responding to the words. They start watching for patterns. They become fluent in what isn't said, in the silences where accountability should live. And they realize not every sorry deserves a seat at your table. Not every attempt to reconnect is rooted in self-awareness. Sometimes it's just emotional control disguised as concern. That's the trick, isn't it? An apology feels like closure, but it's often just a pause in the manipulation. The pattern will resume as soon as it's convenient, and you're left wondering whether your peace is worth fighting for again. But intelligent people stop wondering. They start exiting, quietly, cleanly, without drama, without announcement, without asking for anyone's permission to move on. Psychologically, this is emotional sobriety, a refusal to keep investing in relationships that run on promises instead of proof. They no longer feel obligated to respond with grace when grace is being used against them. They no longer feel cruel for requiring consistency. They simply realize, apology without change is just a soft form of gaslighting. It makes you question your memory, your intuition, your right to draw a line. So they draw it, not as a punishment, but as a new beginning, one where access is no longer granted by guilt, but earned through growth. This kind of clarity is unnerving to those who thrive in cycles, the ones who rely on forgiveness as a reset button, because intelligent people are no longer playing that game. They're not cold, they're not heartless, they're just done being emotionally looped into stories with no ending. And when they stop responding to apology noise, what they're really doing is reclaiming silence as truth. Because silence is not passive, it's precise. It says, I heard you, I believe you, and I still choose distance. That's not resentment, that's restoration. That's the sound of someone stepping back into alignment after years of emotional fog. So the next time someone apologizes but nothing changes, don't argue, don't explain. Just listen closely. And if you hear the echo of the same old script, let silence be your answer. There's a quiet kind of freedom that arrives when you stop needing to be understood, not because you've given up, but because you've grown past the illusion that understanding is a requirement for peace. Intelligent people know this truth intimately. For years they tried. They explained their perspective in softer tones. They rewrote their sentences mid-conversation. They waited patiently for people to get it, to meet them in the nuance, to reflect something deeper back. But often what they received was surface-level empathy, polite nods, shallow reassurances, and moments of being seen, only to be forgotten again. And that forgetting cuts in a unique way. Because when you speak from depth and are heard with convenience, when your silence is misunderstood as distance instead of discernment, you begin to question if you should shrink to be digestible. But intelligent people don't stay in that question for long. They outgrow it. Because understanding, as it turns out, is not proof of value. It's often just proximity and perspective. And not everyone is equipped or willing to go where you've gone internally. So they graduate from chasing validation, from performing clarity, from needing applause for their awareness. And this graduation is not celebrated. It's silent, unseen, but powerful. They stop trying to translate themselves into languages that were never meant to hold their truth. They stop diluting their ideas for comfort. They let others misinterpret. They let the silence be mistaken for detachment. They allow space for assumptions to live without correcting them. Because here's what they've learned. The constant need to be understood is the last chain. It ties your clarity to someone else's capacity. It makes your peace dependent on their perception. And worst of all, it keeps you explaining instead of evolving. The Stoics warned us not to chase reputation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't waste the rest of your life worrying about what others think of you." Because the moment you tether your worth to external comprehension, you hand over your narrative for public editing. But intelligent people reclaim authorship. They write in silence. They let their lives speak paragraphs their words never could. And if the audience doesn't clap, they keep walking. Because applause was never the point. Psychologically, this shift is a reclaiming of sovereignty. It says, I no longer require external mirrors to validate my reflection. It's the end of performance-based belonging. It's the beginning of self-hosted identity. And yes, it's lonely at first. To be okay with being misunderstood. To let go of the urge to clarify, explain, soften your truth so it lands well. But over time, that loneliness transforms into sovereignty, stillness, and an energy that no longer flinches at misinterpretation. They don't argue with gossip. They don't fight rumors. They don't post subtweets. They simply stop feeding narratives that weren't written for them in the first place. And that silence, it's not withdrawal. It's precision. It's power. Because once you've graduated from needing to be understood, you become something even rarer. Someone who no longer performs presence. Someone who can walk into a room, say nothing, and still be whole. So if you find yourself tired of being misread, of shrinking to be palatable, of explaining yourself into invisibility, maybe it's not that you're too much. Maybe you've just outgrown the need to be decoded. And in that realization, you stop talking, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally understand you don't need to be understood to be at peace. You just need to understand yourself. So now you've seen it, the patterns, the pauses, the silent exits, the 5 quiet revolutions that unfold not in arguments, but in withdrawal, not in blame, but in breath. And maybe you've recognized yourself in these moments. The emotional fatigue from one-sided conversations, the invisible exit from rooms that no longer reflect your truth. The day you stop performing for approval you never asked for, but somehow always chased. Maybe you didn't have the language for it then. You just knew something felt off. Something sacred inside you had been left unattended for too long. But here's the twist. You never disappeared. You returned. You didn't vanish from others. You returned to the place no one else could follow, yourself. Because disappearing quietly isn't the end of connection, it's the beginning of discernment. It's how the soul reclaims authorship after being written by too many voices. It's how you reset your rhythm after dancing to noise that never matched your heartbeat. The world will call it ghosting. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you've changed. And they'll be right, because the version of you that needed constant explanation, constant proximity, constant access, that version has evolved, not because it was wrong, but because it was tired, and like a tree that sheds its leaves when the weather no longer feeds it. You've learned to let go, not for drama, but for clarity. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Withdraw into yourself. It is in the inner self that a man dwells in greatest tranquility." This is your withdrawal, not from the world, but from the need to be entangled with everything in it. You're not escaping. You're editing. You're not giving up. You're choosing precision over performance, stillness over noise, self-respect over constant access. And in that quiet shift, you don't just disappear, you arrive. So if any part of this spoke to you, if you felt yourself nodding not out of agreement, but out of quiet recognition, then this isn't just a video, it's a mirror. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you see the reflection clearly. You're not broken for walking away. You're not cold for going silent. You're not antisocial for protecting what the world kept trying to consume. You're just remembering how to be whole without asking for permission. And if you've ever quietly disappeared from a friendship, a family, a job, a room, not to cause pain, but to stop carrying it, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You didn't owe them a warning. You owed yourself peace. And you finally paid it, full price, no receipt. So here's your quiet invitation. If you've ever chosen stillness over explanation, if you've ever left to protect something no one could see but you, leave a comment below with, "I vanished to return." No long paragraph, no story, just that. A signal, a subtle nod, a silent flag for those who know. And if someone comes to mind, someone who's been tired lately, who keeps performing presence in spaces that drain them, send this their way, not as a fix, not as advice, but as a quiet offering. A whisper that says, "You're not the only one." Because here at Stoic Viva, we don't chase noise. We build clarity. We don't sell hype. We honor stillness. And if that's the rhythm your soul's been craving, you belong here. Subscribe not to follow, but to remember. To remember that wisdom doesn't need to be loud, that peace doesn't need to be explained, that real power often walks alone and walks slowly. The next video in this journey is waiting. 10 signals you're becoming emotionally intelligent. Click it when you're ready. No rush, no pressure. Until then, walk softly, pause often, and stay rooted in the quiet places no one can take from you. Stay stoic, stay you, stay silent on purpose.